Ronaldo, hands on the desk.
I'm sorry, what did you just say
The
to
chip
me?
counts you've been shorting and the phantom minibar charges you've been posting to passenger folios. 18 months, 309,000.
Ronaldo Castellanos was trusted with 2 separate billing systems nobody else on the ship could access at once. Investigators say he used both for 18 months on the same passengers.
Your manual override on chip reconciliation exists for legitimate counting corrections.
Manual override on chip reconciliation exists.
He would not get the chance to round down one more chip count before corporate security had already cross-referenced 18 months of casino and minibar records against his own shift schedule. Within days, investigators would confirm $309,000 skimmed from roughly 340 passenger folios across 40 separate cruise cycles, split between shorted casino chips cashed out under his own crew account and phantom minibar charges quietly redirected into a crew gratuity loophole he had learned to work from the inside. A notebook in his cabin would end up matching the fraud dollar for dollar, cabin number for cabin number. 2 cage attendants had followed his instructions for months without ever fully understanding what they were actually part of. One passenger's minibar photographs, taken almost as an afterthought at the start of a vacation, would end up being the thread that unraveled all of it. What began as one manual override on a busy casino night would end with federal prosecutors in Florida unwinding a scheme run by a crew member who, for 9 years, had been one of the most trusted names on the ship's entire billing staff. 340 folios. Sit with that number for a second. That's 340 separate families who probably never checked their bill closely enough to notice. Drop your reaction in the comments and subscribe if this is your first time here. Ronaldo Miguel Castellanos was born in 1988 in Cartagena, Colombia, the third of 5 children in a family that lived a short walk from the city's busy cruise terminal. His father fished from a small boat most mornings before the tourist crowds arrived, and his mother sold arepas and fresh juice from a cart near the terminal gates. Close enough that Ronaldo grew up watching enormous white cruise ships dock and depart almost every week of his childhood. Passengers streaming past his mother's cart in shorts and sunglasses on their way into the old city. He used to tell his siblings, half joking, that he was going to work on one of those ships someday, not realizing as a boy how literally that would eventually come true. He finished secondary school in Cartagena in 2006 and enrolled in a 2-year tourism and hospitality vocational program, one of the more practical paths available to a family that couldn't easily afford university. Learning food service, guest relations, and basic accounting alongside classmates who, like him, saw the cruise industry as one of the few realistic routes to steady international income. His accounting instructor, he later told a fellow crew member, was the first person who ever told him he had a genuine talent for numbers, a compliment he apparently carried with him for the rest of his career. In 2015, at 27 years old, Ronaldo signed his first contract with Meridian Horizon Cruise Line through a maritime crewing agency based in Cartagena, joining the MS Solstice Voyager as an entry-level casino cage attendant, a role that put his vocational training in basic accounting to immediate use handling cash and chip transactions on the casino floor. Cruise contracts typically ran 6 to 9 months at a stretch, with limited time home between them, a demanding rhythm Ronaldo accepted as simply the cost of the steady income the job provided, income that, within his first 2 years, allowed him to begin sending regular remittances home to help his parents and, eventually, to help cover his younger sister's university tuition. He proved himself quickly, developing a reputation among casino floor supervisors for meticulous chip reconciliation and an unusually calm demeanor during the casino's busiest, most chaotic overnight hours, when passengers cycled through the cage in a steady stream of cash exchanges and irritated questions about their table losses. By his 6th year, in 2021, Meridian Horizon promoted him to assistant casino cage manager, a role that came with expanded reconciliation authority, and that same year, an additional cross-training assignment covering minibar and in-cabin charge auditing during a company-wide staffing shortage. A temporary fix that became permanent once his supervisors noted, in his own performance file, that he had shown a genuine aptitude for the reconciliation work across both systems. That dual assignment, unremarkable to the company at the time, gave Castellanos something almost no other crew member on the Solstice Voyager had: simultaneous, functionally unsupervised access to two entirely separate onboard billing systems that Meridian Horizon's internal controls had never been designed to have audited by the same person. His personal life, meanwhile, had grown heavier with responsibility rather than lighter. His father's fishing income declined steadily through the late 2010s as larger commercial operations crowded out smaller boats along the Cartagena coast, and by 2021, Ronaldo had become the primary financial support for both of his aging parents, in addition to his sister's remaining tuition. A burden he carried almost entirely on a crew salary that, while steady, was never designed to support an entire extended family on the other side of a contract cycle. He called home every Sunday without fail. A ritual crewmates remembered him protecting even during the busiest cruise weeks, and colleagues later described him as someone who talked about his family constantly with obvious pride, never once suggesting to anyone aboard that the financial weight of supporting them had become anything more than manageable. Therefore, in June 2022, 6 years into a career built on being trusted with exactly the kind of reconciliation work most crew members found tedious, Ronaldo Castellanos, working a busy, overnight casino shift, entered a small manual override into the cage's chip reconciliation software, a correction tool built for legitimate counting errors, and quietly shorted a passenger's chip count by a percentage small enough that neither the passenger nor anyone reviewing the shift's overall numbers would likely ever notice. Meridian Horizon's onboard financial systems, like most large cruise lines, operate two functionally separate billing channels for a single passenger's overall folio. The casino cage handles cash-to-chip and chip-to-cash exchanges for gaming, reconciling chip counts against cash drawer totals at the end of each shift through software that includes a manual override function specifically intended to correct legitimate discrepancies, a miscounted stack, a jammed chip tray without requiring a full recount that would slow down a busy casino floor. Separately, the Minibar and in-cabin charge system posts stateroom consumption and spa service charges directly to a passenger's master folio throughout the cruise, reconciled by a dedicated auditor role typically distinct from casino operations entirely. Meridian Horizon's internal controls were built around the assumption that these two systems, handling meaningfully different categories of revenue with different fraud risks, would rarely, if ever, be operated by the same individual, a structural separation meant to limit how much of a passenger's total billing exposure any single crew member could influence. The 2021 staffing shortage that cross-trained Castellanos into both roles simultaneously quietly dissolved that separation for him specifically, a temporary staffing decision nobody at the corporate level had flagged as a control risk once the shortage passed, and the arrangement simply continued because it worked. Corporate audits of onboard financial systems, conducted periodically across Meridian Horizon's fleet, historically focused on each billing channel independently. Casino cage audits, reviewing casino-specific metrics, and minibar audits, reviewing minibar-specific metrics. A structure that meant no single audit process was ever designed to notice a pattern spanning both systems at once through a single crew member. Overnight casino hours, when the floor ran busiest and passengers were most likely to be several drinks into an evening, and least inclined to carefully recount a chip stack before walking to a table, provided consistent cover for the cage-side skimming. On the minibar side, the sheer volume of folios processed at the end of each 7 to 10 night cruise cycle, particularly for large family cabins settling a single combined bill, or passengers rushing to disembark on an early morning shore transfer with limited time to review a final statement, line by line, provided similarly reliable cover. That system, built on trust extended to a crew member with 6 years of demonstrated reliability and reinforced by a genuine, if accidental, structural gap in cross-auditing, worked exactly as intended for the better part of 18 months. It also meant that once Castellanos began exploiting both channels simultaneously, no single supervisor overseeing either system in isolation had the visibility to notice a pattern spanning both. The scheme operated on 2 coordinated tracks. On the casino side, Castellanos used the manual override function to record small discrepancies between chips purchased and chips actually issued to cash-paying passengers during his overnight cage shifts, retaining the shorted chips himself and cashing them out under a separate crew member account at the end of each cruise cycle. A routine, low-visibility skim spread thin enough across hundreds of individual transactions that no single passenger's experience ever looked unusual in isolation. He recruited, without fully disclosing his purpose, 2 junior cage attendants into the pattern, instructing them during high-volume overnight shifts to round down chip counts as what he framed to them as a standard house favorable counting convention. An instruction both attendants later told investigators they had followed without understanding they were participating in anything beyond ordinary casino procedure. On the minibar and spa side, Castellanos used his cross-trained auditing access to post phantom minibar and spa charges to cabins belonging to passengers he specifically identified as unlikely to scrutinize their final folio closely, coordinating in part with a junior steward through the ship's internal crew messaging system to learn which family cabins were scheduled for the earliest morning disembarkation transfer each week, passengers who would have the least practical time to dispute a charge before leaving the ship entirely. He then processed a portion of those same phantom charges as voided, marking them item not consumed. Refund to crew gratuity pool, a designation that exploited a loophole in Meridian Horizon's crew incentive structure, allowing voided charge value to be redirected, in small increments across many transactions, into a discretionary gratuity account Castellanos partially controlled. He kept a personal notebook in his crew cabin, an old habit from his vocational school accounting classes, tracking cabin numbers, dates, and dollar figures for the minibar side of the scheme, a private ledger that, investigators would later determine, matched the phantom charges identified in the corporate audit with near-perfect precision. A level of careful record-keeping that made his eventual arrest considerably more straightforward to prosecute than it might otherwise have been. He never kept a similar written record for the casino-side skimming, relying instead on memory and the natural cover of high-volume overnight shifts, a distinction investigators noted reflected 2 different comfort levels with each half of the scheme rather than any deliberate operational security decision. Over 18 months, spanning roughly 40 individual cruise cycles and approximately 340 affected passenger folios, the combined scheme generated an estimated $215,000 in shorted casino chips and $94,000 in phantom minibar and spa charges. A combined total of roughly $309,000, money that went almost entirely toward supporting his parents and covering the remainder of his sister's tuition back in Cartagena. In December 2023, a passenger disputing an unusually high final folio charge for a 7-night cruise contacted Meridian Horizon's shoreside guest relations department after returning home, providing photographs he had taken of his cabin's minibar at the start of the cruise, showing full inventory that matched, item for item, what he insisted he had never touched during the entire trip. Shoreside guest relations, reviewing the complaint against a growing quarterly log of similar post-cruise billing disputes that had been concentrating specifically on the Solstice Voyager over recent months, escalated the case to the company's corporate security division rather than processing it as an isolated customer service refund request. A decision that opened a system-wide audit of the ship's casino and minibar billing data covering the preceding 18 months. The corporate security audit cross-referenced casino chip issuance records against the ship's own surveillance video timestamps for individual cage transactions, revealing a statistically anomalous pattern of shorted chip counts occurring almost exclusively during shifts when Castellanos personally staffed the cage overnight, a pattern absent during shifts covered by any other cage attendant. In parallel, the audit found the voided refund to crew gratuity pool designation had been applied to minibar charges at a rate nearly 12 times higher on folios Castellanos had personally audited than on folios audited by any other crew member with comparable cross-trained access. A statistical gap corporate security investigators described as far beyond anything explainable by routine. Variation in auditing style. Internal Meridian Horizon crew messaging logs, recovered as part of the audit, showed Castellanos coordinating with a junior steward specifically about which family cabins were scheduled for the earliest morning disembarkation transfer each week. Messages that established deliberate targeting rather than random opportunity. A search of Castellanos' crew cabin, authorized by the vessel's staff captain once the audit findings warranted a formal onboard investigation, recovered his personal notebook, its cabin numbers, dates, and dollar figures matching the phantom minibar charges identified in the corporate audit with a precision that left little room for an innocent explanation. Two former cage attendants, interviewed separately once the FBI's Maritime Crimes Unit joined the investigation, independently described being instructed by Castellanos to round down chip counts on specific high-volume overnight shifts, corroborating each other's accounts despite having worked different rotations and having limited direct contact with one another during their time aboard. Both attendants had since left the company for unrelated reasons by the time investigators reached them, a detail that removed any concern their statements might be shaped by ongoing workplace loyalty or fear of retaliation. The smoking gun was the combination of the surveillance-verified chip discrepancy pattern and the recovered notebook together. One data source proving the casino-side skimming tracked precisely to Castellanos' own shifts, and a second, entirely separate piece of physical evidence independently confirming the exact scope of the minibar side fraud in his own handwriting. On January 9, 2024, at 8:15 in the morning, FBI Maritime Crimes Unit agents and a U.S. Coast Guard investigative service officer boarded the MS Solstice Voyager at Port Everglades and approached Castellanos in a crew corridor near the casino as he prepared to begin his shift. "Ronaldo Castellanos, we need to speak with you about casino and minibar billing discrepancies," the lead agent said. Castellanos stopped, his shoulders tightening. 9 years I've worked for this company. 9 years of contracts away from my family, and you want to talk to me about discrepancies? We have 18 months of chip records and minibar charges tracing directly to your shifts. His voice grew sharper, exhausted rather than defiant. You know what this company pays crew who work the hours I work? You know what it costs to support a family from a ship in the middle of the ocean 9 months at a time? That's not the question we're here to ask you. No, it's never the question anyone wants to ask. He looked past the agent toward the casino floor visible down the corridor, the same floor he'd worked overnight shifts on for years. I did what I did to take care of my family. I'm not going to pretend that makes it right, but I need you to understand it wasn't nothing to me. We understand. We still need you to come with us. He nodded slowly, some of the sharpness draining out of him all at once. I want to speak to a lawyer before I say anything else. He was escorted off the Solstice Voyager in handcuffs at 8:24 that morning, walked past the same casino cage where, for 9 years, he had been trusted to count out other people's money down to the last chip. The sentencing includes a written statement from the passenger whose photos started all of this. Stay for that part, and subscribe if you want more of these every week. Federal prosecutors in the Southern District of Florida charged Castellanos with wire fraud, theft within the special maritime and territorial jurisdiction of the United States, and embezzlement by a ship's officer or crew member. A federal grand jury returned the indictment in March 2024. Facing the surveillance-verified chip discrepancy pattern, his own recovered notebook, the crew messaging logs, and 2 independently corroborating cage attendants, Castellanos pleaded guilty to all 3 charges in June 2024, rather than proceed to trial. At sentencing, the passenger whose minibar photographs had first triggered the corporate audit addressed the court by written statement read aloud by the prosecutor. "I almost didn't bother disputing the charge," it read. "It felt like too much trouble over what seemed like a small amount. I think about how many other passengers probably felt exactly the same way and just paid it." The court sentenced Castellanos to 5 years in federal prison and ordered $309,000 in restitution to affected passengers and Meridian Horizon Cruise Line. He was permanently prohibited from employment aboard any United States flagged or United States departing commercial vessel for the remainder of his life, closing off the entire industry that had defined his adult working life since the age of 27. Asa Colin Whitmarsh, who prosecuted the case, noted at sentencing that while the court recognized the genuine financial pressures Castellanos described, those pressures did not excuse 18 months of deliberate, methodically tracked fraud against hundreds of individual passengers who had trusted the ship's billing systems to be accurate. Meridian Horizon Cruise Line implemented a company-wide policy following the case, explicitly barring any single crew member from holding simultaneous access to both casino cage and minibar auditing systems, formally closing the exact structural gap that had allowed an otherwise well-regarded 9-year employee to quietly operate across both channels at once for 18 months. The company also began requiring passengers receive an itemized digital minibar and spa charge summary at the midpoint of every cruise rather than only at final checkout, giving passengers an earlier opportunity to flag a discrepancy while still on board. He counted other people's money down to the last chip for 9 years. The case waiting on the right-hand side never even needed a chip to disappear.